As I sit here ready to relive the first experience I ever had with the PlayStation 4, I just can't wrap my mind around the fact that this revolutionary 2K title dropped an entire 5 years ago. Just to put that into perspective, today we're as far away from NBA 2K14 as we were NBA 2K9 when this game first came out. And through all of that time that's passed, I just have one burning question I need to ask the devs one day. Why did you change the graphics? If you had any experience with this game whatsoever, then you absolutely have to remember the first time you turned it on. The excitement, the epic intro, and then the first quick game you played to see the upgrades from last gen consoles. And 5 years later, I feel cheated that I was able to turn this game on to review it, and truly believe that it still reigns supreme as the best looking basketball game ever made. But we'll rave about the graphics more when we get to that section. For now, we begin our dive into this iteration to rank it according to its presentation, gameplay, graphics, and features to determine where it ranks amongst the other 2Ks. Starting with presentation. For the third year in a row, this opening sequence was absolute heat, but it wasn't intended to hit as hard as 12 and 13's. The point of this intro and the music they used was to make you feel like you were entering a new era of basketball video games, and in that respect, they passed with flying colors. It truly made you feel like you were about to experience something great for the first time, but I'd be lying if I said there was not an immediate drop off from there. Well, if you're first popping in the game, then you get to start designing your My Player, but for every other time, you just get dropped into what is easily the worst menu that we've reviewed so far. Back when the servers were up, I'm pretty sure my team was an option here somewhere, but regardless, you just got put on this blue screen with a couple of options to choose from with absolutely no thought going into the design. This was 1 year before 2K TV was introduced, so when you loaded into a game, it just took you down this tunnel talking about everything that was new in the game. There was no commentator voice talking about the matchup or anything, which shows me that I didn't fully appreciate that until it was gone. But then you actually get into the game and it literally just says to you, look at my graphics. The 3D logos pop beautifully, and in some occasions you would actually see the lineup presented with 3D models of the players. That takes us into the most important section of any of these titles, gameplay. I kinda feared looking back on this game that I wouldn't remember anything bad about the gameplay since I was so enamored with how it looked, but there's some really important things here. The most important of which would be the EcoMotion engine. This was where 2K basically built the game from the ground up. Everything from the emotion the players would show, the way they looked and moved, how the ball bounced up and down from the floor, how their feet were planted, just every single detail had attention to it, which was why it looked and played the way it did. For instance, I remember one of the gameplay features they announced was how players wouldn't land the same way during the jump shots anymore. Basically meaning that during every possession you took a jump shot, it would be more like in real life where players constantly react to what's around them. Very little details like that, the ball spinning in a player's hands as they return from the floor, these things just made it feel like a totally new experience. Something else that's more of a feature but really helped the gameplay was the addition of even more signature skills. They expanded a lot on what was in 2K13, making it so that players really started to feel authentic to their real life counterparts, on top of the fact that the shooting forms for each player got really authentic as well. The changes they made to the game pushed it so far above what we were dealing with on the previous consoles that it's difficult to name everything that was good about the gameplay. It was truly revolutionary in that respect. But of course, just like every other 2K game, it had its cheese. For this one, the one we remember most would be the zigzag cheese, where there was practically no penalty for running back and forth until you had daylight for an open shot. But just like how the graphics improved so much, the gameplay was just so improved from the PlayStation 3 that it's near impossible to remember other huge problems with the game. So like these days and in the previous 2Ks from recent years, you can just off the top of your head name multiple problems that each game had, and I really don't feel like that for 2K14. The mere fact that you could actually block dunks back then was such a massive improvement that it was hard to be mad with much else. And now, these graphics. You know, I actually had a video I was working on back around summer trying to determine if and why NBA 2K14 was the best looking game on these consoles. So from here on out in each review, we'll put up a screen of 2K14 gameplay for comparison. But for the moment, here's what I found. NBA 2K14 was all about lighting. I went through every 2K game that came out after this looking at the same things like the hoop, the shot clock, player models, cameramen, and literally the only difference is that 2K14 had such unique lighting. In one of the trailers they posted, the devs detailed how they went to every arena and designed the game based around the lighting they captured, meaning whatever light sources that existed in real life in the arenas also existed in the game, and that's why it looks so stunning. If you look at the same exact things in the 2Ks that came after this, you notice that the goals look exactly the same except for the net, and the objects really did not change. It was just all about how the game was lit. And for the life of me, I cannot explain the design choice they made after this to ditch that idea. I don't know if it was taking away from the performance of the game in other areas, or if there were just certain things they couldn't accomplish if they kept the lighting, but this game looks clearly better than everything that came after it. I can't even begin to tell you how disappointing that is, because a big part of the excitement that year came from wondering what was going to come next. On the PS3, we saw a steady increase in graphics for at least 3 straight years before it became questionable. So a big part of the mystique for 2K14 was wondering, well wait, what is 2K15 going to look like in 16? You really thought it made sense for them to keep getting better. Yet here we are in 2K19, and the only thing that looks better now are the player models and the cyber faces. If you took those and put them into 2K14, the game would reach god tier status in terms of graphics. So enough about that, we can move on to features now. And this is where my excitement starts to go down just a little bit. My theory is that they spent so much time working on this game trying to bring it up to a next-gen experience that they basically stripped a lot of things you could do in the current gen. There was no more create a legend, you couldn't use custom rosters in my career, and from what I remember, you couldn't even create a player anymore. So that meant that legends that weren't readily available in the game, they just simply weren't there, I guess, unless they were in like my team or something. And because it wasn't on PC, there was no way to rig them in there. They put most of their feature effort into what was already there. For instance, my career for the first time became an all-out story mode featuring you and your rival Jackson Ellis battling for superiority in the league. There were entire cutscenes where you can make decisions that would affect your career, and it's truly one of the most important changes 2K made in terms of putting us on the path that we're on today. Every single My Career since then has had some form of story, and I honestly don't think that they're ever going to be able to make another My Career without a story. As much as I don't care for them and I think that they're cringe, how would they ever justify going back to the days where you just gave an interview after the game and moved on? I don't know, I mean, there's a way, but we'll eventually see what road they go down. I'm just not sure how many different spins you can put on a come-up story in the NBA. Oh, also another pivotal addition for the series was the park. For the first time ever, there was a fully designed blacktop for players to walk around and get into games with each other. It wasn't perfect by any means, but I think we can all agree that this was a change for the better coming into the new consoles. The only thing that ever really brings me back to My Career after I get bored of the story is the social aspect and playing with other people, and I'm glad to see that it's taken on a life of its own as the series has progressed. Their next big change was My GM, and this was the mode that replaced the association. I hated this idea from the day they introduced it, but at least they left the option for you to just play a normal season if you wanted. Basically in My GM, your player from My Career would become the GM of a team, and it was a very interactive mode. You could decide what type of GM you would be, what your strengths would be, and you had to have conversations with people, including the players, and make decisions that would ultimately determine everything from who was playing on the team to how many people would even come to the game. I'll say this, I've never liked My GM, and I've never actually chosen to play it over just running a regular association, but the feature itself is a very cool idea, and for the people who are actually into this type of thing, it's a great mode. In later 2Ks, they brought back the ability to do seasons that are closer to the original association, so that's much appreciated for people like me. And then the last big pillar of this game that was brought back was My Team. More or less the same mode with a few additions, including tournaments that you could take your team into, and you could also now take your team up against your friends. And who can forget those locker codes that are still around today? You could put them in for your chances at rare cards, but I'm not sure anybody has liked this since it came out. And that's basically what NBA 2K14 was built around. But there were a couple of under the radar features that were both good and bad. On the good side, they added courtside interviews during games, which I honestly don't even know if they still exist outside of My Career. But true story, the night this trailer came out and showed players talking at halftime at the end of quarters, I immediately wrapped up my PS3 to go trade it in to cop this on opening night. Looking back at it, this was slightly disappointing because they always wound up saying the same thing. You could hear the background noise of the audio that they actually took it from, and their lips never really matched what they were saying as well as they do here, so it just wasn't believable. Regardless, still a great step in trying to add to the realism of the game. NBA Today was also rebuilt as 2K partnered up with a stats company that allowed them to update the rosters very quickly to reflect what was going on in real life pretty much by the day. This was called Dynamic Living Rosters. And on NBA Today, for the first time ever, you could see actual recaps from the night before. And that was a great expansion of a feature that began all the way back in NBA 2K10. The one bad feature, which was extremely greedy, was that on Blacktop, the superstars actually cost VC to use. So if you even cared about Blacktop and wanted to use LeBron or classic superstars, you had to purchase them. I even saw that in the LeBron Special Edition pre-order of this game, one of the perks was that you automatically have him in Blacktop, which was, I'm pretty sure it was that way in every other game where you didn't have to actually buy anyone there. So now that the game servers are shut off, or back then if you weren't connected to the internet, you couldn't even use the best players in an offline mode. I experienced this a couple of months ago when I went to go visit my cousin. We didn't have any other games lying around except 2K14, so we popped that in, and this was actually on the PlayStation 3. And when we tried to play on Blacktop mode, we were stuck using second and third tier players because of this BS. The servers don't exist anymore, so it couldn't check if we had bought them already with the VC, so they just weren't there at all. But speaking of Blacktop, for some reason this is where all the 2Ks on PS4 just looked their best. Well, at least that was the case up until 2K17 when they just kinda quit and started using the same courts, but that's another story. And yeah, basically that's it, believe it or not. The last two features that survived from previous 2Ks were the ability to create shoes, and get this, they randomly brought back the tutorial from NBA 2K12. You know, that awesome mode where a mentor teaches you everything that was definitely needed with the new mechanics. So yeah, they wisely made that available for everybody and not just people who paid for a training camp inside my career. The online mode was also nothing really special that I remember. You could go get into a quick game and that was about it. Even on the new consoles, they never brought back anything as cool as what they did in 2K9 with those leaderboards. So before I rank, I did want to mention 2K14 on the last gen just because there are some interesting things here, and people were consistently asking if I was going to review it. Definitely not doing a full review, but it is cool here to look at the fact that that game was little more than a patch for NBA 2K13. I bought it back then because it came out like a month or two before the PS4 versions dropped, and the game looked exactly the same as 13, except that it did fix a lot, like not being able to block dunks, so that was important. But the features of that game were the most important thing here. They had that LeBron Path to Greatness mode that they really should have ported to the PS4. This was a dope mode that I don't think a lot of people got to experience, and I don't know why it was exclusive to old consoles. And B, they quote-unquote brought back crew. And this is absolutely hilarious. First off, it wasn't really crew. It was just a mode with your My players on the exact same blacktop court they used in NBA 2K13. Second, in the trailer advertising crew, they literally had 2K YouTubers from back then talking about how cool it was that the crew was back and how hyped they were, and 2K would have had to drop me a serious bag to say this shit with a straight face. They half-assed a beloved mode and only had it on last-gen consoles. And then they really had the nerve to have these influencers from the 2K community hype it up like it was some grand return. Yeah, nah, they would have had to run me the max for this right here. So now we rank. Presentation is getting a flat 6.5 from me. Harsh rating, but hear me out. Part of me wants to excuse the fact that they had this lifeless menu and nothing going on because of all the effort they had to expend on the important parts of the next gen game, but also, how hard could it have been to assign part of the team to make something dope here? NBA 2K7 was their first crack at a game on the PlayStation 3, which was notoriously hard to develop for, and they still managed to do an awesome job with the presentation. I just can't imagine that they had no time to do something more than this. But do correct me if I'm wrong. One thing I will say is that my game is not connected to the servers because those are long gone, and one thing I'm starting to remember is that it would go to this screen if the servers were off, but if they were on, did they load straight into NBA Today? I think that might have happened. That's not changing anything though, the presentation still sucked. I am, however, giving both gameplay and graphics a 10, and let me explain. It's always hard to give any 2K game a 10 for gameplay because you know there's cheese and frustrating aspects, but I have so much appreciation for what they were able to accomplish that year. They practically built a new game from the ground up with new mechanics and much smoother AI and gameplay, and it was just a great time to be a fan of sports video games. And as far as the graphics, this game in 2019 looks better than any basketball game that has ever been produced. The simple lighting effects nearly put 2K19 to shame, and I need answers for this. If I wanted to be corny, I'd break my ranking rules and give the graphics like a 14 out of 10, because that's just how damn beautiful this game looks. It nearly makes up for any issues the game had. And then for features, despite the fact that it looks very light compared to the other 2K games, I'm going to go 9.9. When I first sat down to review this game, I planned on giving the features like a 5 or something like that, because back in the day, I didn't care about my team or my career. I only wanted to play season mode, and occasionally I wanted to play the park of my career. Therefore, I didn't get to experience a lot of what the game had to offer at the time. Looking back at it, the effort that they put into my career and my GM was really hefty. And even if I didn't care for them, I think they accomplished what they were going for out of the gate on these new consoles. And when you step back and look at it in terms of my team, my career, my GM, and just regular games, there was a good amount to do considering the year and expectations at the time. The reason I didn't give it a 10 is because they took very simple things out, like being able to create players for rosters, and being able to add legends to my career in favor of having to play through a scripted story, and then leaving out something that would have been amazing like LeBron's path to greatness. Definitely can't give it a 10, but that's still a massive improvement from where I started when I sat down. So that leaves us with an overall score of 9.1, and that currently puts it in 4th place among the current rankings. And just to reiterate, these scores are all very close and they're now being separated by like 1/10 of a point. And also, so far what I'm finding is that these rankings are reflecting the game according to its time period, and not necessarily where they stand in relation to each other all time. So like I say at the end of every video, that's what we're going to do at the very end, where we look at the scores that they ended up with, and then we start ranking them with some context of like what year we're actually in right now. And I just felt the need to say that because obviously NBA 2K7 is not a better game than 2K14, but the score came out higher mainly because of something like presentation. So put your pitchforks down. NBA 2K14 was an incredible way to launch into the next gen consoles, and is clearly still the best looking game in the series. It holds a special place in my heart among all the 2Ks because this is the year that I officially became a YouTuber as well. That's where I started doing the 3 Kings in New York, and as you've seen from the things that it added, it was very important to the future of 2K. But as we're gonna find out soon enough, 2K on these consoles has been a very rocky road, and in these rankings, it's gonna get worse before it gets better. So leave your comments below and let me know what you thought about this game. Hit the like button and sub if you enjoyed, and hit the bell next to my name if you want notifications on future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.